Salutations, fellow YouTubers. It is myself, of course, Jonathan, also known as the PC Genie. Today, we're not just going to be talking about machetes in general, we'll be talking about this particular one, which is the Cold Steel 24-inch Latin machete specifically. Had a sticker on this side, but it's quite old. I've bought it a few years ago, so it gradually got quite yellow and brownish, so I peeled it off. Anyway, basically, one of the reasons I chose, I have to admit, I've always liked swords and such things more, but looking at things like zombie games, and I thought, yeah, machetes, they're tools, but unlike other tools, they're sort of most sword-like tools there are, and they're also good for, well, going through garden things like trees, bushes and whatnot. So, got this. I was just having a look at the prices. I remember it was somewhere under £25 when I bought it back then, but even now, it's only something like £23 now. And, you know, compared to actual dedicated swords, that's incredibly cheap. Yet, it's not one of those buyer beware, you get what you pay for, swing, snap. Instead, this is actually a really decent blade. So yeah, you get a really decent quality for the same sort of price as something that'd be pretty tacky in sword realms. Most of the way. Cut cleanly through. Very nice, and as you can see, a bit rough around the edges and not perfect, but that can be described as my cutting technique. I'll admit it's not perfect, but I must say that's a pretty good chopping cut, especially when you consider that the actual squishiness of the bottle sort of absorbs a bit as well. I have to admit, previously, I mean, when I first bought this again, this was before I took up historical European martial arts, I was quite sort of weak and, well, almost stick-figured. I know it might be surprising, I'm getting quite fat now, but yeah, back then I was quite weak, and thus I actually found blades like this, the larger blades, actually quite heavy, even though it's only about £1 or so. It really isn't, you know, in terms of compared to things like, again, swords, it's quite lightweight. But yet, with the forward balance, I mean, I'll put my finger on it. Here we are. So, a bit too far. Here you can see it's pretty much towards the middle rather than next to the actual handle. So hence, for the same weight, you've actually got more heft. And actually, because of that, and also because right from the factory, it's got a good sharp edge, and I've also myself sharpened it further and maintained it. It's incredibly good at chopping. And it also, I suppose, helps that it's got only a 2mm thick blade, and I was worried when I first bought it, and I look at these thin blades and I think they're going to wibble wobble when they hit things and, you know, just generally cause nightmares and not really do much actual chopping yet. With this, even against, you know, softer targets like bottles, or against harder targets like actually chopping at wood, including thick branches, still performs brilliantly. I have to admit, I'm genuinely impressed of how good this has been at chopping capability. Clean cut, well, on the first chop, and for the second chop, you do see a cut here. I don't know if you can see it or not, but there is also a nick just in the corner there. It's hard to see in any light really, but in fact, here we are. Let me put my finger through there. So it's sort of, I think it was on the first chop it was a diagonal carve through, whereas on the second it's sort of a lot more surface area. The blade contacted it at once, hence it didn't actually cut as cleanly through that time. Plus, with the sharpening I've done, might be that it struck on an area that wasn't as sharp as on the first strike, maybe. This time it cut a lot of the way down and through to here, so almost completely through, barely this much, in fact remaining. I could probably just pull that apart. So again, quite a clean cut as well, especially considering, again, quite squishy, so it's absorbing some of the impact and yet it's still cutting cleanly through despite the amount of give. Now with this, I have to say, I mean, normally your typical machetes, they come in, I mean, even ones like this itself, you actually get them in things like 18-inch blade lengths, and similarly with machetes you might see out in the Congo or somewhere, wherever, where they actually need them for gardening or whatnot, you'd normally see much shorter blades. But I'm very impressed to have ones like this, because with a 24-inch blade, it's still not as sharp as an, well, not sharp, sorry, as long, rather, as a sword blade, my apologies. It's still fairly long as machetes go, so it's almost like a halfway house between the two. Compared to swords, it's a bit shorter, more compact, better in tight spaces, and just generally more sort of handy to carry around. But compared to other machetes, you've got more reach that is always useful in combat situations, and also just for test cutting to chop through things like, well, as you'll see in my videos, bottles getting chopped up to bits and splashing everywhere, and that sort of effect, or even a counterattack from an actual opponent. Keeping an extra bit of reach is always a nice, handy sort of thing. Excuse me. So, as we can see, a nice cut here, all the way through, flew it off. Same with the second cut, and with the third, almost the whole way through. But not quite. Now, call me a child for saying this, but one of the things I love about this is, apart from the fact that, well, as with any high carbon steel blade, you can polish it up and get a nice sheen on it. It's a bit grubby at the moment because I've recently used it for hacking through ornamental bamboo, but believe me, it gets a lovely shine. You practically need sunglasses with this. But one of my favourite things about this is when just generally sort of chopping through the air with it, or actually hitting targets, it has a nice ring to it, which is always a good sign of a good quality blade, not sort of cracks and softness that make a dull buh, but instead a nice sort of hack reverberates around a nicely made blade and you hear a that. Very nice sound. So yeah, I mean, I've got a clip actually where I did a simple cut and you can hear the absolute ding that it gets every time you do a nice chop. So here it is. I'll try again. Mention probably finally is that it really feels nice in the hand. I mean, I mentioned earlier it's quite lightweight, so thus it's not as heavy as, well, sort of axes and quite heavy, hefty objects, but yet it's got a forward weighting, so it still feels like a heavier item. So then with those things combined, and the type of handle it's got, which is some kind of moulded polypropylene or some other plastic like that, with the sort of ridges and a sort of cross-hatching type of design. It's nice and secure in the hand. It feels really nice. You'd think it's hard, so you'd think as soon as you hit something it's going to go BAM! Ow! Hand! But actually, I've done plenty of hacking at it, even with, against things like logs, and it actually feels really nice and comfy in the hand. And that's also, sometimes you can hold it sort of like this, where it's just a sort of hammer grip, chop along with that, or you can do what in swordsmanship would be sort of, as they call, fingering the guard, where you put your actual index finger over the main cross guard and sort of use that for more agility. I do an equivalent sometimes and put my finger and thumb over where the actual handle is supposed to stop, and the blade doesn't immediately start there, so I'm not going to cut my fingers up or anything. And for doing things like a spin or just generally, warming up before doing some cutting exercises, it's nice. And also when doing the actual cuts themselves, having that type of grip seems to work nicely for me. But again, it's personal preference. You can always just switch back to a standard hammer type grip and do a nice hefty chop. Lovely. So yeah, overall, believe me, I'm not getting paid by Cold Steel to review this. I genuinely like it. So if you're thinking of getting Machete of a cheap price but good quality, I recommend this. Still here? Alright, here are some bloopers then.